Presiding Officer, the news this week of the risk of reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete, known as RAAC, in our schools is causing understandable anxiety for parents, pupils and staff. The Government have confirmed that 37 schools have been identified as containing RAAC. So can I ask when the Government first became aware of the issue and what steps it took? And also, will the Government commit to publishing the list of the schools impacted so parents and pupils have at least some of the answers they deserve?
First Minister.
Can I thank Anas Sarwar for his question. So we were informed and about RAAC for not just many months, actually, for years. And that's why, for example, we ensured that our education leaders had the appropriate guidance from the Institute of Structural Engineers last year. We have been proactive over that period, particularly the Education Secretary has been proactive in relation to her discussions with local authorities to ensure we have a full understanding of the picture. I can confirm that, given that we have further information back from local authorities, that 40 schools have been identified that have RAAC in them, and of course the appropriate mitigations have been put in place. In terms of Anas Sarwar's direct question, I think it's a very fair question. Yes, we will work with local authorities to ensure that that information is published. I would expect that publication to happen at the end of the week, not just a list of the schools that have been affected, but I think if we can give more information around the mitigations in place, that will give some confidence to parents and indeed to pupils and staff who are in those schools. So we are working with local authorities to ensure that information is published, and there is of course a statement later this afternoon where the Cabinet Secretary will lay some of that detail out.
Anas Sarwar.
First Minister, the Institute of Engineers say they began inspections in schools for RAAC in 2018. And the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service say they warned that buildings are at risk of collapse 2 years ago. So it is important to know what steps the Government took, especially as the First Minister said they have known about this for years. Specifically on the schools impacted, how many schools have either a partial or complete closure? How many are subject to the additional building works or emergency engineering support? And finally, what resources are being made available to local authorities to deal with these affected buildings?
First Minister.
So there's a number of questions which, again, I'm happy, if we don't get to the detail of, to write to Anas Sarwar in full detail. In terms of the mitigations in place, they vary from school to school to school. So various schools, for example, and other public sector owners of public sector buildings, they have taken a number of mitigations. If I take local authorities and schools, for example, St Kentigern's Academy in West Lothian, they've closed part of its estate, including the dining and kitchen areas. Preston Lodge High School in East Lothian has closed off impacted classrooms and other areas. So each school will determine, given the Institute of Structural Engineers guidance, will then choose to take the appropriate mitigation in place. Fire stations, of course, that have been affected as well, they already have put mitigation in place. And again, I'm happy to furnish Anas Sarwar with some of the detail. In terms of funding, we are, of course, aware of some local authorities wanting a discussion in around funding, and of course we'll continue to have those discussions with local authorities, but ultimately they are the ones who are responsible for the safety of the school estate. I did note the Chancellor of the UK, the Prime Minister, in fact, of the UK, say funding will be made in order to help with mitigations in relation to RAAC, but I've seen in the last 24 hours, 48 hours, them roll back on that commitment. So we'll continue to have conversations with the UK Government. In fact, the Deputy First Minister wrote to the Treasury on the 16th of August last month to call for the allocation of additional funding to remediate RAAC. But I know there's a number of questions Anas Sarwar has asked, and I'm happy to go back to him in writing with fuller detail.
Thank you. Anas Sarwar.
I welcome the commitment to publish a list of schools, and can I ask that public information to include what mitigations are taking place in those schools to give that reassurance to parents. The Government have delayed the next phase of their school rebuilding programme. Local authorities submitted bids a year ago. They were meant to get an answer by the end of 2022. And we know that at least five of the schools on that list contain RAAC, although I suspect that number will be far higher. Those schools are still waiting, so this must be dealt with urgently. And this issue also goes beyond our schools. We know that 255 NHS buildings across Scotland are being surveyed for suspected RAAC. So can I ask the First Minister when these surveys will be completed, when we'll have a complete list of all public bodies affected, and how soon will we have a timetable for any required remedial action so we can give patients, staff, parents and pupils the reassurances they deserve?
First Minister.
Again, I'm more than happy to furnish Anas Sarwar with further detailed writing if I'm not able to get to all the questions he answered. In terms of the school estate, we'll be making a decision on LEAP imminently, but we are also now looking at that programme through a RAAC lens. I think it's important for us to do so. This government does have a good record when it comes to building schools, or indeed substantial refurbishment of schools since 2007-8. We've had 1,098 school builds, or indeed substantial refurbishment projects that have taken place. And of course, Anas Sarwar will be aware that school estate statistics came out just a couple of days ago, and they show that 91% of schools in Scotland had a good or satisfactory condition rating. That's significantly improved from when we first took office. In terms of the NHS, a major study is already very much underway. NHS Scotland Assure are leading that. The desktop review exercise that took place showed that 254 buildings have 2 or more characteristics consistent with the presence of RAAC. And the next phase of the survey has commenced, and 9 buildings have now been confirmed to contain RAAC. That's from 40 buildings that have been surveyed. But I think, going back to Anas Sarwar's very original point, I think it's a fair one. We will work with partners, not just local authorities, but NHS boards and others, to see how much of that information can be put out publicly. I hope Anas Sarwar and others will appreciate that will be an evolving picture as these surveys continue to progress.